You know, the most natural thing for us to do as human beings is to look out for ourselves. It just comes naturally. You don't have to teach anyone to be self-centered. It's just part of who we are. Now, on a certain level, this is okay because we all need a certain level of self-interest just to survive, right? You have to look out for food and water and shelter and love, and that's actually a good thing. But the problem is we all have this sinful, nature inside of us, and what it does is it takes a healthy level of self-interest and it twists it and it perverts it and it turns it into selfishness. And we have this tendency just to become very self-absorbed and very focused on our needs and our wants and our desires, to be very self-centered. And because sin is a universal condition, this condition of self-centeredness is also universal. But the real danger of this is that as we just pursue this natural pathway of selfishness, thinking it's going to make us happy, in fact, it doesn't. We think that the more we focus on ourselves, have a me-centered life, it's going to lead to, happiness and joy and fulfillment. But in fact, just the opposite happens. What we discover is that the more selfish we become, the more unhappy we become. And then so as you feel this unhappiness, we decide, well, I need maybe to focus on myself more. So we become more selfish, and it turns us into this just nasty cycle where we focus on ourselves more and more, thinking it's what we need to make us happy. But in fact, it only leads us to be more and more unhappy. So Jesus, knowing this dangerous cycle we get ourselves into, he actually addressed this very directly in the book of Matthew. Listen to what it says. Matthew 16:25, "For whoever wants to save their life will lose it, but whoever loses their life for me will find it." Now think about that. Jesus says the more you try to selfishly cling onto your own life, basically the more you seek after yourself, the more you end up actually losing your life. You cling on to this me-centered life thinking it's finally going to make me happy, but Jesus says the more me-centered you are, that actually leads to you losing out on life. In the New Testament, in the book of James, it picks up on this same idea. James 3:16 says, "For where you have envy and selfish ambition, there you find disorder and every evil practice." I mean, that's pretty direct. It says the more you allow yourself to get caught up in envy and in selfish ambition. Isn't that what a me-centered life is? It's selfish ambition. The more you get caught up in there, what does it lead to? It leads to all sorts of disorder, to dysfunction, and to evil. It leads to sinfulness and just more and more brokenness in our life. It kind of reminds me of those toys we used to play with when we were kids. They called them Chinese finger traps. It was kind of like a tube with an opening at either end, and you would put your fingers in it, and then as you would pull your fingers out, it would actually tighten down on your fingers. And so the harder you try to pull your fingers out, the more the trap would tighten down on your fingers. You see, that is sort of what this cycle of selfishness and me-centeredness is like. We think, I just need to be more me-centered because I'm not feeling happy. But in reality, the more we pull toward ourselves, the more we become me-centered, it's just like it tightens down and brings us deeper and deeper into bondage. It's not a good situation. So, what is the solution? What is the antidote to this me-centered life that doesn't actually make us happy? Well, the Bible gives us a very clear answer to that in the book of Philippians. Philippians 2:4 says, "Let each of you look not only to his own interests, but also to the interests of others." So the Bible commands us there not just to look out for ourselves, but also to look out for the needs and interests of others. Now, notice it says also look out for others. It's not saying that you should never try to take care of yourself. The Bible recognizes there's this healthy level of self-awareness and self-interest you need to look out for, but he warns us against allowing our sinfulness to warp that. He says, don't just look out for yourself, also look out for others. Also be focused on the needs and desires of other people. And Jesus taught this exact same idea. And in fact, Jesus taught that the more focused we are on serving others, the more joy we will ultimately have in life. Listen to what Jesus says in John chapter 17. Starting in verse 13, he says this, "I told them many things while I was with them in the world, so that they would be filled with my joy." So the context here is Jesus is praying to the Father right near the end of his life, and he's just pouring out his heart, praying for us, his followers, Christians. And here is his prayer. His prayer is that we might be filled with joy, and not just any joy, his joy. See, God doesn't want us to have this sort of shallow, selfish, unfulfilling joy. He wants us to have that deep kind of joy that can only come from him. And so as he's praying for that, what does he say? He says, I have told them all these things. So this joy comes from understanding all these things that Jesus has taught us. Well, what has he talked about? All throughout his life, Jesus was teaching us over and over again not to focus on ourselves, but to focus on others. Jesus himself said, I haven't come to be served, but to serve. He said, I have come to seek and to save the lost. Jesus said, I have come here as a servant. He lived and died as a servant of other people. And Jesus said, that's what you are supposed to do. And specifically in this chapter, he's going to connect this a little bit later because he's going to say, I want them to have this joy. And in this chapter, he's been talking about these things, again, that whole idea of serving others. He specifically has been talking about his mission, that he's come to be on mission to help people, to serve people. And then he connects that and he says, the more you live on mission, the more joy you will have. Look what he says in verse 18. Just as you sent me into the world, I am sending them into the world. Now, notice what he did there. He connected that joy he was praying for in verse 13 with us being sent out into the world. He basically says that if you want to find that true joy, it comes not by being self-interested, not by having a me-first mentality, but no, instead by you going out into the world and doing what he did, which is seeking to serve others and point others towards spiritual truth, point others toward eternal life, looking for practical ways to love people in truth and in action. That's what Jesus did. And he says, the more my followers do that, the more joy they are going to have in their life. So, while a me-centered life comes very naturally, don't buy into the lie that it's ultimately going to make you happy. It's a futile pursuit. The Bible makes it so clear that the more me first we are, the more that's going to lead to unhappiness, to sadness, to dissatisfaction in life. But conversely, the irony is the more you focus not on yourself, but on serving others, that ultimately is the way to find joy and happiness and meaning in this life.